Welcome to the Data Beats show. We also have a free newsletter, so do check it out on databeats.community. Joining us today is Vijay Ganesan, the co-founder and CEO of NetSpring. And in today's episode, Vijay and I are going to talk about his journey from BI to product analytics, followed by the emergence of warehouse-native product analytics solutions. So here we go. Hey Vijay, thanks for joining.
Hey Arpit, great being on your show. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's start from the beginning, Vijay. You and your co-founders have collectively spent 26 years building ThoughtSpot, a leading BI solution. So with BI under your belt, what made you delve into product analytics?
Yeah, so we did ThoughtSpot starting 2012, and ThoughtSpot we started a traditional on-prem appliance type form factor, and as we graduated more to cloud and SaaS and product-led growth motions, we realized the need for product analytics, and we used one of the first generation product analytics tools out there in the market today. And it gave us that first level of visibility into what people are doing in the product, right? The main value we got was the tag management and instrumentation. And that was good. But then we quickly hit a brick wall, right? When you had the next level of questions, it did not have the analytical sophistication that we needed. And it did not have the rich business context that you want to combine with your product instrumentation streams. We wanted to bring Salesforce data, ticketing data, and support data, and so on. And so we ended up dumping all the data out. It was extremely painful, right? And so we realized that a lot of folks out there are going through that same pain that we experienced. And we recognized that there is an opportunity to build the next generation of product analytics, just as we had built the next generation of BI with ThoughtSpot. And that's what sparked the idea of NetSpring.
So BI was built to explore relational data, whereas product analytics relies on event data or behavioral data. From a technical point of view, can you briefly explain why it is so challenging to offer both capabilities in a single product?
So historically, both those worlds have been very, very different and distinct at all levels of the stack. The way you collect this data and store the data, that's very different. Usually high velocity event data typically never reached the data warehouse, right? Which is where you did BI. And it was not feasible to store a petabyte scale data in traditional data warehouses. Second, the nature of computation is very different. In BI, you're doing dimensional slice and dice. You take a metric and you slice it by different dimensions. And so the way you structure the data, star schemas and things like that is very different from what you do in the world of event data, where you're not studying the final state, you're studying the sequence of events that lead to a final state, right? So you're looking for paths people take. So temporal component is very important. Sequence and paths are very important, right? And thirdly, the way you express the analytical computations are very different. In BI, it's SQL oriented, whereas in the event data world, SQL is not the best language for expressing the analytical intent. So at all levels, they are very, very different types of systems. And so historically, it's been very, very difficult to do one in the other.
So now let's talk about what you're building at NetSpring, right? You're championing the warehouse native approach to product analytics while offering additional capabilities to explore other types of data that's already in the warehouse. Can you explain in simple terms how it really works?
Yeah, so at a very high level, if you think of what's happening today, the data warehouse is becoming the center of the universe for data. You've always had data from business systems coming into the warehouse, your Salesforce data, your ticketing data, your order capture systems. That has historically always come to the warehouse. But now what's happening is there are these other sources like product instrumentation streams, IoT sensor data, all of this data. It's now feasible to store in the data warehouse, right? It's affordable, it's cheap with the cloud data warehouses. So you're seeing a shift now where data that historically never came to the warehouse is now coming into the warehouse, right? And so the way we work is we simply sit on top of the data warehouse and we don't move any data out of the data warehouse. We push queries down into the warehouse and we can compute across product instrumentation data and data from other business systems. So now you have a single source of truth, data in one place, no data movement out of your central secure enterprise repository. And you've got richer analytics that cuts across, traditional product analytics and more analytical, sophisticated BI style analytics.
And what about performance? Historically, there have been performance issues, querying large amounts of data in the warehouse. How does NetSpring solve that?
Yeah, great question. I think, conventional wisdom has always said that you cannot get these event-oriented queries to perform on the warehouse at scale. You're talking about, first of all, very difficult to express those queries. They're very complicated queries if you're studying a funnel or a path or sequence of events and so on. And second, you cannot get these things to perform right in traditional data warehouses. But one of the key innovations that we've brought to the table is really solving that problem, right? We really believe that in modern cloud data warehouses, you can achieve performance at scale for these kinds of very specialized product analytics queries. And so the way you do that is a combination of two things, right? So one, we have a language called NetScript, which gives you a level of abstraction above SQL that allows for optimizations in your SQL generation layers. So that is oriented for these types of queries, right? Second is we do techniques like auto materialization, sampling, indexing, all of that stuff, again, specialized for product analytics type workloads, right? So we compensate for some of the lack of native capabilities in the warehouse for optimization of these kinds of queries with our layer and above. But the key thing is we do this all inside the warehouse. It's not done outside in some other system. So we're going to see with those two combinations of the kinds of things that vendors like us do and the evolution of the data warehouse, we think that's no longer true, and that's very fundamental because once you break that barrier, then you're talking about, truly a next generation of analytics, right? So that's one of the key innovations we bring to the table in the space.
So NetSpring doesn't ingest any data, which is great. But are there any prerequisites for it to work? Do companies need to model the data, model their event data as per a specific schema? Can you quickly walk us through the implementation process?
So first, instrumentation. We don't do any instrumentation. We believe in this decoupled instrumentation concept, this idea that you use best of breed, decoupled, unopinionated instrumentation systems, the rudder stacks and the segments and the snowplows of the world. Use those to land the data in the data warehouse, right? You need to have that in place. And increasingly, we're seeing that pattern, as part of this composable CDP movement, best of breed, decoupled, unopinionated instrumentation that lands the data in the warehouse in a form that is consumable by anybody, right? So that's one. So you need to have that in place. Second, in terms of the schemas and the data modeling, we can consume any arbitrary schema. And this is one of our key differentiations. Unlike first generation tools like Amplitude and Xpanel, we don't require you to force your data model into some pre-canned user session event. You can work off a generic data model. And again, this goes back to our BI DNA, where we're similar to BI tools in the sense they can work off arbitrary schemas. We are fundamentally relational in nature with event layered on top of it. We call it relational event streams. You point NetSpring to whatever schema you have in your data warehouse. You do some decorations on certain data sets to turn them into event streams. And then you have the full glory of product analytics and sophisticated BI type analytics on top.
Now let's shift the conversation to the first generation of product analytics tools, right? So they all now support the data warehouse as a data source, but they still need to ingest the data into their own data store, right? So besides the lack of ingestion, is there anything else a warehouse native product like NetSpring does differently as compared to traditional product analytics tools?
Yeah. So great question. You'll hear people say, "Oh, we work with the data warehouse," right? What does that mean, right? The minute you start moving data out of the warehouse, there's a problem right there, right? You immediately end up with brittle systems, two sources of truth, numbers don't add up between this system and that system and so on. So data movement is a massive, massive headache. And there's privacy, security issues. There's lots of reasons why you don't want to do that, right? So that's a huge, huge headache. But it's a lot more than that, right? Because when these tools talk about we ingest data, they're talking about very lightweight reverse ETL, where you take a few properties and stick it on top of the user object in those systems, right? Whereas in NetSpring, when we talk about working off your data model in your data warehouse, we talk about consuming those data models in its native form. So in NetSpring, if you're looking at Salesforce data, for example, you'll see first-class entities for accounts and contracts and opportunities. And, if you're looking Zendesk, it's tickets. And so So the ability to consume this business context in a very native form is very, very powerful. And that's what lends itself to very rich analytics. So there's the headache of data movement, but there's also this problem of you don't have a generic flexible data model. So it's very lightweight, the kind of analytics that you can do in those systems. And then there is this moving back, so when you have this type of disconnected systems, you invariably end up with two different systems. So you do some analysis in your first generation tools, amplitude, mixed panel, but then you dump data out. You're going the reverse direction of data movement, and then you put some looker on top of your warehouse. So now you've got this two disconnected systems. So we eliminate all of that, right?
Yeah, and what are the key factors that make warehouse native products more affordable than their traditional counterparts?
So actually cost is a huge, huge factor. And it's really a game changing now with this warehouse centric model. How the cloud data warehouses revolutionized data warehousing. One of the big factors was cost. And the reason is one, cloud object stores are dead cheap, right? You can store petabyte scale data at very low cost. Two is this elasticity and pay-per-use model. You will hear a lot of people say, 60, 70% of what I send to, amplitude mixed panel, nobody uses, but I'm still paying, right? Mm-hmm. Why are you paying? Yeah. You shouldn't be paying for that stuff, right? You should be paying for storage, but everything you should pay only if you use it. So the shift from data-based pricing to more value-based pricing is what, this cloud warehouse native architectures facilitate. So, you're not paying twice for your data. There's a copy of your data in a warehouse and a copy somewhere else. You're not paying for all the ETL jobs, moving data back and forth. You're only paying if somebody queries the data. You can store a lot more data. You don't have to be thinking about what should I send, what should I not send, and trying to cut costs. You can store everything cheaply, but only pay if somebody uses that data. There is cost associated with even figuring out what to send, what to not to send, what to delete, and things like that. So there's process costs, operational costs. And then there is the large opportunity cost, right? If your analytics is very siloed, if it's not business impactful, the opportunity cost of that is so huge. Whereas in this warehouse-centric world, you can just get phenomenal business advantage. So overall, we feel you can get order of magnitude difference in cost, just as when you went from Teradata to Snowflake, you had an order of magnitude difference in cost. So it's the same thing. It's a generational shift.
With product analytics running on the data warehouse, it becomes really easy for GTM teams or go-to-market teams to access all types of data and perform richer analysis. For instance, I can now combine my product usage data with data from my email engagement tool to get a full picture of the user journey. How they're moving from doing something inside the product to actually engaging with an email campaign that they've received and then performing the desired action by going back into the product or not. As someone who's ran growth, I cannot stress on how important it is for teams to perform such analysis. Vijay, so what else would you add here? How else can GTM teams leverage a tool like NetSpring to build better products and experiences?
Yeah, it's a great point. We talk about this concept of evolving from product analytics to business analytics, right? So historically, product analytics has been siloed. The only source is your product instrumentation streams. It's completely disconnected from the rest of the world for most part. But, the world is changing towards product being the center of business. Every function cares about product first, right? That's the primary driver for growth. So we call it, the companies need to move from product metrics to business metrics. Product instrumentation data is just one source of data, and you have to combine that with other business systems data to get a 360-degree view into your product usage and customer experience.
And besides the rise of the data warehouse, what other organizational shifts are contributing to the adoption of warehouse native apps?
Yeah, so there's really three big trends that are happening. One is this warehouse centricity where all data is coming into the data warehouse. The second is this idea of composable CDP, best of breed systems plugging on top of the warehouse, whether it's instrumentation systems, analytical systems, machine learning systems, activation systems, all sitting directly on top of the warehouse and plugging into the warehouse. And the third one is increasing sensitivity to security, privacy, GDPR, those kinds of things. And the tolerance for data going off into some black hole, that is going away very, very fast. People have less and less tolerance for that. So the combination of those three things is really what is driving this generational shift in product analytics.
Thank you, Vijay. Last question for you. How does the warehouse native approach to product analytics make it easier for organizations to adhere to privacy regulations such as the GDPR?
It's very simple. At the core of it is no data leaves your central secure enterprise environments. I mean, that is fundamental. And it's almost a religion for us that data will never leave. And when we say data doesn't leave, some folks will talk about warehouse centric, but they end up building caches, materializations and indexes and cubing systems and all that outside of the data warehouse to get performance. We don't do any of that stuff, right? We believe you can push everything down into the warehouse and still get very good performance. If your systems that plug into the warehouse do not make copies of your data, it makes it much easier to comply with the regulatory things.
If you'd like to learn more about warehouse native apps, you can visit databeats.community and check out the series titled Warehouse Native Apps. And if you'd like to learn more about NetSpring, you can visit netspring.io. Thank you. Help bridge the gap between data people and non-data people. Join us on databeats.community.